I do have one more, much more serious topic to broach with you before we go to the main subject for tonight, which is that I saw that you'd had a run-in on Twitter with maybe the foremost scholar of our era. They actually call him Conceptual James.
That's right.
So
wow, he must be really intelligent to earn a name like that.
Oh, Jimmy James is a big brain guy, that's for sure, right? You can see that on any clip where he's talking about communofascism and how it's going to take over the world, and the way that it's going to do that is by grooming kindergartners to wear rainbow-colored clothes, right? Deep level stuff that you really need to sit there and dwell in a little bit, not even to understand, just to begin to understand. It's important.
Yeah, I remember I had like a year or two ago, I had Lillian Sakarici on, and I played her in GTA style one of those clips of Lindsay talking about communofascism.
That's so fucking
and then like I just remember after it was done, she was like, what? I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this.
I'm a person of medium moral virtue, as I like to point out. Sometimes high moral virtue, so I kind of deserve that. But Lillian's a nice person. She doesn't fucking deserve to be subjected to goddamn James Lindsay. I wouldn't fucking subject James Lindsay on Ben Shapiro.
Well, fair enough. So let's take a look at this. So I should say that the prehistory of this exchange is that another friend of the show, Jordan Peterson, had posted some rant about what he called the Luciferian nature of Marxism. And you pointed out that that Peterson talks a lot about Marxism for somebody who seems to have read very little Marx. And I think you also made the point that there's something a little bit funny about the rant about Marxism being Luciferian, given Peterson's famously far greater respect for and actually often very admiring mentions of Friedrich Nietzsche, who one of his books is literally called The Antichrist, and it's not a denunciation, but in response to that, you got some Peterson super fans going at you, and one of them mentioned James Lindsay, and so this is not exactly a bomb-throwing tweet, but you'd responded to that by saying yes. And as we make clear here, it's a link to an article called Race Marxism. That's one of James Lindsay's books. I love that title. James Lindsay is also not an authority to be trusted on these matters, or even when discussing classical liberalism, ironically, to which Lindsay responded, showing why they call him Conceptual James. You stupid fraud.
Yeah. Which was really fucking ironic also, because the whole prompt for this conversation was the guy saying, well, leftists don't actually know how to argue with us. They just call us stupid. And he was referring to, the way that I talked about Jordan Peterson. So I retweeted something from our book, Ben, Myth and Mayhem, being like, look, we've never called Peterson stupid. Actually, at the front of the book, I called him a really smart guy. Then he freaked out, tagged in Conceptual James, and what's the fucking first thing that Jimmy says? You fucking stupid fraud. Fuck you. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh, just the fucking big guns the right is bringing out today. The really difficult kind of arguments that make me shit myself because I don't know how to respond to them. Right.
I should also say that in the course of all these people being like, oh, you're just calling people dumb. And you pointed out, right, that you and I and Marion and Conrad had written this book called Myth and Mayhem, a leftist critique of Jordan Peterson. So clearly we're taking him seriously, right? We did a whole book spawned the arguments, and people started to be like, yeah, here's the part of the book where you're calling him dumb. And so what they picked out was a couple paragraphs in the book that I think started with, well, but Peterson doesn't know any of this. He says, blah, 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 right? And the two things that were funny to me about this, one, he's clearly not being called dumb in that passage. He's just being called wrong. And two, they didn't glance at the table of contents first, because I fucking wrote that part, right? I mean, that wasn't even you, right? Like, it was like, oh, you're calling Peterson dumb. It's like, no, that's literally a quote from the essay that I wrote for that book.
I know, man. It's like fucking, you can't even get authorial attribution right. Come on, right? I mean, if you're going to tag fucking conceptual Jimmy in here to try to fight your battles for you, at least fucking put in the effort to figure out who wrote something, right? If you're going to try to make the claim that, classical liberals take intellectual seriousness with a great deal more severity than people on the left, right? But just to go back to that Myth and Mayhem book, I'm still pretty happy with what a lot of what we wrote there. The kind of irony is, at the time where I pitched that book, it was partly because I figured that Jordan Peterson was going to become something like a Roger Scruton or Patrick Deneen type conservative intellectual, right? Somebody who obviously I would disagree with a lot, but who was a serious intellectual who offered considerable or formidable arguments against the left, and we'd have to respond to them. And boy, oh boy, was I wrong about that, right? What we got instead was a guy talking about commie cum factories that are going to fucking just drain the semen out of guys in order to bring about their kind of woke utopia, right? So the motivation behind the book seems a little anachronistic right now, but I still feel pretty proud of what we put out.
No, I mean, I'm very happy about that book. It is a little bit funny, actually. I think another thing people were objecting to in that page that they thought you wrote, that I wrote, was that I'd used the word histrionics. And gotta say, in the few years since then, the man has not gotten less hysterical.
Yeah, like that was the other thing. Like, if the term histrionic doesn't apply to someone calling Marx literally Luciferian without ever fucking having read any of his work, then God, I don't know what is. And what kind of offends me about this is I've read probably all of Peterson's major work at this point. Certainly all of his books, most of his papers, lectures, and all this stuff. I read Maps of Meaning twice, right? It's so fucking obnoxious that they would be railing about against me and you and others for this when he can't even fucking be bothered to go through more than a 20-page pamphlet by Marx, and yet still sees absolutely fit to inveigh about shit that he clearly doesn't have any understanding of, right? Like I said to the guy at the end of this whole exchange, and Jimmy, right? Just hold yourself to the fucking standard of a first-year undergrad, right? Like, if you fucking handed in an essay that didn't even bother citing any primary sources and your response was, well, my gut tells me it's wrong, you'd fucking fail, and you'd fail hard. And they can't even meet that really, really, really basic standard when it comes to evaluating this stuff. And it's just so offensive.
Yeah.
And lazy.
Yeah. So when you made that point, Lowell, I'm not the one who wrote an entire book of the subject without marshaling any real arguments against James, who says your entire life as a critical theorist is writing on subjects without marshaling any real arguments against them. So I repeat myself, you stupid fraud. So look, got to give the guy credit. I assume he's read all 7 of your books. He's gone back and he's, what are you up to? Like 50 articles in Jacobin. I assume James has read all of
49,
those.
very soon.
And he's realized, and he's like earned his opinion, and he's decided that there are no real arguments in any of those books or articles or essays. I disagree, but whatever, man's entitled to his opinion. Yeah, I like 2 things about that name, Race Marxism, James Lindsay's book. One of them is, of course, that it actually manages the impressive trick of making it sound like something that would be written by somebody actually much worse than James Lindsay is.
That's true.
And I think James Lindsay is pretty bad, but that title makes it sound like that would be like, that would like be from like Waffen 1488 press, right?
Yeah, that's true.
But 2, just the sort of basic premise is so fucking stupid that it's like, oh, well, see, if you think about it, critical race theory is like Marxism because Marxism says that workers, or I don't know, we haven't bothered to read enough about Marx to know exactly what it says, but it says that like workers are treated badly in some way or another. Good enough, right? So, and this talks about oppression, not of workers, but whatever, right? There's some group being oppressed by some group, right? So it's like it's essentially Marxism if you do it's essentially Marxism if you do some global search and replaces in the Word document, which is amazing. It kind of reminds me of Karl Popper is obviously somebody who I think deserves much more respect than James Lindsay, but
sure.
he did say something that was like really silly along similar lines in The Open Society and Its Enemies, where he like quotes something by Hegel and says, oh, if you substitute in race for like whatever it is that Hegel says, right, this could be a Nazi thing. I remember Walter Kaufman has something where he's talking about this, like, yeah, and if you substitute in, love the Aryan race for love your brothers and your sisters, and like quotations from Jesus, those sound really bad, right? Like, what does that prove, right? But also like just the basic idea, it's like, oh, well, you're talking about one group being oppressed by another group, so even if it's not the same group and you're not saying the same thing about it, this is essentially Marxism. One of your co-hosts on Academic Edgelords, Ethan, always has a great line about this, which is like, yeah, you might as well call libertarianism state Marxism.
Yeah, Ethan's good that way. Yeah, I will say, to their credit, I do love how fucking many different flavors of Marxism they come up with without ever having to bother reading anything by Marx, right? It's really pretty impressive how you can have so many opinions about things while knowing jack shit about it. I mean, at this point, we're at meta-Marxism, race Marxism, American Marxism, cultural Marxism, Judeo-Bolshevik Marxism, right? I even saw Peterson the other day be like meta-postmodern Marxism, and I'm like, good God, what the fuck is that, right? It's really, really kind of awe-inspiring, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, don't get me wrong.
I kind of want, okay, at this point, we could surely get an AI to do the scene from Forrest Gump where the guy's listing off all the kinds of shrimp, but for Marxisms.
Yeah. Well, that's it, right? And the other thing too is like, look, if there really are so many fucking kinds of Marxism in society, then boy, oh boy, did we ever win the Cold War, hands down, right? Because apparently everything from fucking Disney to like Big Cola is a Marxist company right now. So let's just rewrite the history books and be like, look, communism won. It wasn't even really a fair fight, and it's over now, right? We'll just all concede on this. But Lindsay's book is, I will say, not the worst of these kinds of hyphenate Marxism books that I've read. That still belongs to Levin's American Marxism, hands down, right? But it's still pretty fucking bad, right? Like when you open a book by being a critical theorist or really conspiratorial, and then almost immediately you're like, critical theory is creeping into like every school and every small and every movie theater, and it's right behind me right now. Where are the critical theorists? You're like, I think that actually you might be projecting a little bit, fucking James. And the other thing that really bothered me about it is any reasonably acute fourth-year undergrad, again, knows that if you're going to write about a topic critically, then you got to actually have some fucking criticisms, right? You got to sit there at the end and be like, hey, now that I've summarized this, here's my argument against this. Jimmy is so goddamn lazy that he doesn't have anything to say about this. He's just like, well, actually, if you think about it, Mark is kind of a Gnostic thinker who didn't have anything to say about economics, despite actually writing 2 books with subtitles called A Critique of Political Economy, or even just the overt fucking title, right? It's like, okay, I guess if I snorted enough cocaine, maybe I'd come up with the conclusion that Marx was a Gnostic thinker either. But unfortunately, I just didn't have that much fun when I was younger, and I can't really reach that conclusion.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.